Meditation. I had it noted down. Hi, everyone. Absolute honor to be here with Sam. I just wanted to start with a meditation, and I was going to explain it as part of sort of a spiritual practice that has become important to me, but I thought, why don't we just do it together? So if everyone just arrive. It's called RAIN, people who know Tara Brach. So it's an acronym, and we start first by just checking in. So let's take a deep breath in and hold, relax into it and release. Recognize and name whatever's going on inside of you. Most predominantly what you're feeling, what's coming up for you right now. Is there tension or anxiety, anticipation? Are you distracted? Just whatever you're most aware of. And just allow, let it be there right now. With allow, we can pause and we can make space for whatever is here. Acknowledging this is what it is in the moment and just letting it be here. By allowing, we are able to deepen the attention to now investigate. Just asking what and where is it that wants your attention? Where do you feel most vulnerable in your body? With investigate, we're feeling into the body. We're feeling into place. And sometimes it helps to ask ourselves, what am I believing when this is happening? Sense if there's a belief going on. But most important, whatever you're believing is being felt in the body, and pay attention to the throat, your heart, your belly, and what emotion might be there. Is there a feeling of rawness, of aching, contraction, heaviness? Is there an image? And the investigation can turn to nurturing. When we ask that vulnerable place, how do you want me to be with you? What do you most need from me right now? It could be to feel or to know something or to trust. Asking and responding to this place inside of you from the most loving and wise part of you. It could be your evolved, or you picture like your future self speaking to yourself. You call on this wisdom and love and offer what is needed. Again, sensing where it is in the body, you can put your hand there. Just offer yourself just that tender touch and compassion. And after the rain, it's time to just rest in that awareness, in the quality of this presence and the sense of your own being and how it may have shifted. This is the truth of who you are, beyond any story you can tell yourself. This is your true home. Thank you all. Thank you for arriving with us today here.
Well, Kym and I were laughing when we were organizing our conference hour here, because she and I are kind of the odd couple up here together. Some of you may wonder how come I'm up here again, since I did a conference hour last Northfield. The backstory is that Julie, who organizes the conference hours, was so excited when Kym agreed to talk about rescuing hope, which is our theme. And we thought we needed several perspectives. So she turned to me and she said, well, you wrote something about the COVID-19 epidemic. You could say something. And in the spirit of recycling and reusing, we thought, yes, maybe I can. But the truth is, in a sense, Kym and I offer very different perspectives on the last 3 months and our rescuing hope. And so as we worked together in preparing, I realized there was a kind of, the universe had a reason for linking us together, I think. And hopefully that'll become clear as we talk together. So Kym, do you want to pick up on the theme of rescuing hope? Introduce it for us?
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah, I laughed when I saw that when Julie wrote me, and I was just like, because I was at the time also, I was like, at the end of the day, and I was exhausted, and when I was like, oh, what? Wait a second. And then I wrote Sam and Julie right after, and I was like, I was thinking more like, I don't know, rude awakenings, or about friggin' time we woke up, or I don't know, brutal truths. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Yeah, I was like, wow. And then so Sam and I kind of, our little acronym for it is WTF, question mark, exclamation mark, which encompasses everything, kind of what we're both going to be talking about and what we've experienced over the recent months and recent years. But what after went through, I wrote that email and I thought, every day I have to restore hope. I chose to go into teaching so that I could work with children and youth who could restore my hope because they were constantly hopeful, right? Hope filled. And yeah, every day it's a choice I make, and multiple times a day. Given, if you're conscious, like we all are here, you're aware of what's going on in the world, and you're aware of your own challenges and the challenges around you and the extremity of what we're living today. And I think, yeah, it's a choice. I think we're all making that choice to be conscious and to be aware. And yeah, and I believe that I have a purpose. My soul chose to be here. My soul also chose the situation that I found myself in. And I'll be talking more about family, realizations with all of that. But, so that also spurs me on. It's like, I made myself a pact somewhere. I may not remember it, but I think I did. And I'm here to make a positive difference. So get out there, basically. So.
I think of kind of every morning for me, Kym, is kind of like pumping up the hope balloon. Hope kind of lifts me up and gives me energy, and it requires some effort every morning to kind of pump up the balloon. It's as if my hope balloon has a little leak in it, and every day it kind of flags a little bit, and in the morning I have to kind of pump it up and lift my spirits.
Yeah. It's funny, I used to say, pull up my socks, but I really like the balloon idea,
Pull up your socks works too.
Pull up your socks, yeah. And so we have it in sections and chunks because, doing this together, we had to make sure we organize ourselves, and that was terrific working with Sam with that way. So we're looking at just sort of the last years, and I say last few years, I mean, I'm talking for me predominantly the last 5 years, where I feel like my life has been about, and talking about what we're all living too, about mortality and death and vulnerability, just that in our lives, but also as a human species, and species on this earth. So Sam, did you want to just briefly talk about, before I get into my...
Sure.
I cut you off, I realized. So.
If I think, no, that's okay. Feel free. Happens all the time. If I'm going to talk about the last couple of years, when I was at Northfield last summer, since then, I realized a couple of things, actually. 75th year, and that I was moving into, I think if I had an image before all the stuff hit the fan in the last 3 months, if I had an image back in August, say, of what the next several years would be like in my life, it would be kind of a combination of, the golden years BS, you're in your golden years, and the wax on, wax off guy. Remember Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid? So I had an image of my elderhood as being kind of, sitting around making wise, kind of opaque comments about life. Julie and I have had anticipated making a couple of trips over the next few months. We had a trip to Costa Rica planned for early March, had a trip to France for this coming September. I was planning on closing my psychotherapy practice leaving more time for writing. And we had a granddaughter born last August, Lucy. So a lot of my image of what 2020 would be like was based on travel, seeing my granddaughter, taking it easy, and being wise, understanding life. So that's where I was leading into the last few months. And Kym, do you want to kind of take it from there and give some background for yourself? And then we can talk about what it's been like since February.
Yeah. Yikesy. First of all, I wanted to point out my shirt. I don't know if people can see it. Forgot to do this earlier. Northfield 1986. Celebrating our differences. Yeah.
You
It
still
feels
are.
like what it's been about, and acknowledging, and but also, what connects us. And so a brief overview, because Sam reminded me that not everybody knows everybody. And so I've been going to Northfield, like Chantal said, for a long time. And I went with my stepfather, Ron Cook, and my mom, Doreen Cook, who were like in many ways my best friends, and Ron was the heart of our family and the brainiac of the family. And being in a wheelchair, he was, limited, physically limited. And he came into a family that was very physical, sort of gross motor, if you will. And my brothers are all older than me. The youngest brother is 6 years older than me. So there was a disconnect between the family, and then there was a divorce that happened and broken family kind of thing. And so Ron, Mom, and I were a hub. And Ron died 5 years ago, and then Mom just died in August. Yeah, so I was saying that the last few years have been a lot of closure, lot of death, and I feel like I was been watching Harry Potter with my nieces and my nephews again, and I saw the scene last week of the Thestrals, and they're those creatures that no one can see. They pull the carriages that the students are in, and kids all assume that it's just magic that's pulling them, but it turns out they're these beautiful creatures that are kind of gross, but they're so skeletal that they are kind of beautiful in a way. And Harry sees them, and his very airy-fairy kind of new age friend turns and says, well, Harry, only those who have been touched by death can see them. And it feels like that's how my eyes have shifted, the way that my eyes perceive the world. And I think, and I've talked to other people around that, you see things differently. And especially people who have been in illness and have been vulnerable, and you've been taking care of them, especially like during the pandemic and all of that, I'm much more aware, right? You're very aware of that vulnerability. I just wanted to preface everything that we're saying today is I feel very disjointed, and I feel like everything is very raw because of the situation with COVID and pandemic, and plans that were made for me to be relocated by now haven't happened. And I'm still in the family dynamic. I'm sitting in my sister-in-law's office right now, and the family dynamic has been a tumultuous one, and it has been one that continues to teach. And I wrote Sam yesterday, and I was just like, how can I want to give voice to this, but I also want to honor, and I want to honor, and Ron and Mom, and they're part of your community, but I also want to speak my truth. And there's been a lot that has come up for me, but so much opportunity to heal, which also feels very synchronous with what's going on globally. So it just feels like everything is, there's just nerve endings. And I'm not in a place, unfortunately, with the family because Ron and Mom are no longer part of that family. The dynamic is there's not really place for that, So it feels wonderful to be here and to be sharing, but just to know that I'm feeling pretty raw. And I apologize if it's disjointed. I just to go back to the family dynamic growing up, and those of you who knew my mom and will know that she was a force to be reckoned with. And one of her mantras was, I was telling Sam, because, you know, when we're at Northfield, people are kind of rosy and you see the best of each other. And one of my mom's mantras was, you know, if you want something done right, you do it yourself, you know, like kind of thing. And also family is like, we're like the wall that you bump up against. If there's an issue, it's just like, well, you need it. And that's how you learn to toughen up, you know, and no one said life was fair. There's that kind of a dynamic, you know, growing up of, you know, kind of almost like a suck it up buttercup. And really, I found it interesting. I've been listening to my mom's story. She fought me on this, but I'm so glad I did it. We sat and I recorded her story about, I don't know now, probably 15 years ago, I guess. And I didn't think I'd gotten as much because eventually she said, oh, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this. I'll take care of it. I'll do it. And she never did. And when we downsized and we moved her, we downsized, that little set of cassettes with the little tape machine actually moved with us. And I found an adapter and have been listening to it. And I cannot believe what she has survived. Molestation and abuse, and I mean, it goes, abandonment, and goes on and on and on. And she has humor through all of it. And I'll be listening to that with my niece. We've planned to sit down and we'll send it to everyone so they have it. But just to say that trauma, the word trauma, I'm finally using the word trauma. I'm using the word trauma for myself. I'm using the word trauma for my mom, and I'm seeing it in my nieces and my nephews, which is what's causing me to really put voice to this and be who I am in the family in a different way. And Sam said to me, you know, trauma erodes hope. And it's a key element because I sent him my notes. I said, blah, here are my notes. Like, I don't know where I'm going, but it's here. And he said, okay, this is what I'm seeing. And he said, you know, trauma overwhelms the capacity to bear and find hope. And you become, I don't know if I wrote this or you, Sam, but reactionary survivors, you know. And I have now, I'm so aware of it that I see it in others, and I'm very cautious because I realize, you know, you're functioning from a very different place. You're functioning from fear and survival, you know, not frontal lobe necessarily. And it's a scary place for me to be interacting with those I know who have trauma in their past, because it makes you reactionary. And I've been working on that in myself. So I'm very sensitive to that. And when I was with my mom and she had a medically assisted death, and she basically asked for it and scheduled it, and we were all there. And I got to stay with her I was working with her for the last year, basically, taking care of her. And then we spent the time in the hospital together, and I slept beside her. And at one time she turned to me and she cried. She was crying, and she just said that I hope I haven't hurt too many people by the way that I've been in this life. And I know that I can see that because I've been like that too, programmed to be, you know, if you feel vulnerable inside, well, you're going to be hard on the outside and pushing people away and that kind of thing. And I see that in one of my nieces who's been staying with us. She's so much like my mom. So I'm really doing a lot of work with recognizing that we have this as part of our ancestral sort of trauma. My mom was also one who would say, don't give labels. Don't give labels, because I, you know, had issues with depression and anxiety and that kind of thing. And she did too. I found it at the end, but she didn't recognize it either because she didn't want to give a label to anything. And that was a different time too. I mean, I find this generation, they talk about it and they've got all the acronyms and they know all the, you know, it's much more open and part of what they talk about. For us, it wasn't, you know, it was a lot more shame involved. But to see my mom come to a place when she was basically 24 hours away from no longer being with us, thinking about how she had impacted others. And so I look back and I was comparing sort of my life, and I don't really have trauma, but I feel like I have trauma. I feel traumatized. And it was Dorothy Mason, actually, thank goodness, Dorothy, I hope you're out there, Dorothy, who said, you know, trauma doesn't have to be necessarily, you know, like physical abuse or, you know, verbal, or, you know, the extremity of what we think of when we think of trauma. But if your authentic self is not recognized on a regular basis, that is traumatic. And that's what I'm living still today with the family dynamic. I will often find myself just torn down because it's like, you know, I'm the one who's connected to the land. I'm the one who's very sensitive, and um, well, I'm just me. And I don't know. We pigeonhole. We're an Italian family with a Anglo-Saxon background, and so it's like, suck it up, Buttercup, and toughen up. And then we were very critical, and there's a lot of negativity and talking about each other behind each other's backs. And I just, the more work I do, the harder I find that to be in a situation like that. And especially, I'm staying at my brother's where I was, so I could be a caregiver to my mom, where I still am. So feeling indebted to them, but the dynamic is, so I bite my tongue a lot and don't speak, and find I'm getting, not feeling well inside of myself. And how do I be authentically me in that situation? So that's stuff I said, like, I'm still working on. But my nieces and my nephews being around, I'm seeing it in them and going, let's call it. And they're truth speakers. They're calling it like it is, much more than my generation, in the family. Another thing, I know there's been progress made because I grew up where mom didn't cry. I've been to funerals with mom where we went to friends of hers who died that she'd known for 50 odd years and not shedding a tear. And I had a stop valve. I quickly learned how to cry, but shut off. As I saw anyone, it would shut off automatically. And touch. Mom and I had to work on touch, on reaching out and touching her. And so it was wonderful, the end, working with her. I was cleaning her, I was dressing her, I was massaging her. It was just lovely. And Chantal was a big one. And Chantal is a toucher. So Chantal became like a sister and a daughter for mom and I, and she would touch us. And it was so interesting how she was kind of like, she connected us that way, And so I remember the first time sitting on the bed with my mom and watching a movie and making myself hold her hand, and then it became easier and easier. Oh, yeah. And mom would always call me melodramatic. Don't be so dramatic, and so you learn how to sort of shovel that down. And I was sitting with my niece the other day. I know I'm kind of going back and forth here, but something happened with her the other day. And she said, I have all these feelings and all this anxiety, and I know I shouldn't, but and I just was able to say, let's just sit there with it and allow it and don't fight it. And it's so interesting to see how we can heal as we learn, as we change. And it's like, I can be that way with her, where mom couldn't, she didn't have those mechanisms, and thank goodness for Northfield, because Northfield and Ron, and there was a lot of healing that did happen. And don't get me wrong. But again, in the family dynamic, which is sort of still the case, and I'm getting better with it. I was out west for 10 years, and I did the whole, environmentalist thing and the outdoor pursuit thing and whatever. And I came back to Quebec because of Ron and mom. And Ron had a bout of not being well, and I just felt really far away, and my brothers were having kids. So I came back, but I gave up a lot. It felt like, a whole community that felt like it fit. And I came back in Quebec. I was like 10 years behind. I come back with my reusable mug, and I've got all my whatever outdoor gear and whatever. And I come back, and it's like, what the hell is that? What are you doing that for? And a family that wasn't into that at all. And so we'd have gatherings, and I'd be like, why isn't anybody recycling? And I became known as the nag, and the people would be like, Kim's coming over, cleaning up the garbage or whatever. So I've learned over the years, in the last years especially, to just speak from the heart, or don't speak, but and trying to find that balance there. And I think I'm breaking that mold, but right to the end, mom, and I would see it, because I would be watching a situation, and it wasn't a naggy situation. I would just be concerned about something. And she'd say, would you shut up? You're such a nag. And I'd be like, would you stop calling me that? So we really had to break through that stuff right to the very end, And so, yeah, it's an ongoing, and I'm learning how to speak differently, but I am recognizing where I couldn't figure out why I feel like my default is happiness and comedy, and humor. Sam and I talk about humor being so important. And I realized, spending time now with my brother, who is, I say he's the guy who had the happy gene. I realize now that that was, I think, kind of covered over, because the younger brother who I ended up living with my mom before mom and Ron married, my mom was divorcing. He was a bully, and actually, yeah. So, and I would be afraid to be left alone with him. And he's seen the light, and he's much more spiritual now, but he still sees me as broken and I'll fix you kind of thing, as opposed to let's talk about our history. So we're getting there, but I realize now, mom and he, when they were together, unfortunately, when I was young, this is just before coming to Northfield, actually, so that's when Northfield was really important. I started to get depression. I started to have night terrors, and which led to other things, eating disorders and all sorts of things, and not knowing why. Like, I look back now and I can start to unlayer and recognize. And when Ron came into the family, like I said, it was the heart. And when he died 5 years ago, it shifted back again, and it was so stark. What I had lived, and I went, oh my goodness. And my mom was grieving, having lost Ron, and she wasn't doing well, and things, just that proverbial shit hit the fan at that point. We're talking about 5 years ago. And I as an adult, I was able to love that child, and I said, I see this. Because that same brother, moved back home after Ron died. And it was my mom and I and this other brother. And I would walk into a room. It was like when I was a kid, I would walk into a room and people would stop talking. Or I'd ask, can I help you? That, no, it's fine, thanks. Being tolerated. And that, I realized there was also that pattern in the family of just being tolerated, and not really being wanted, and often being needed, but not being wanted. And yeah. And so Sam asked me, why is holding on to hope been so difficult for you over the years? And I think there was an erosion, of the self that I felt like I came into this world with like a purpose, and I had all this vim and vigor, and then it felt over the years, you kind of learn how to be less than, and you learn how to maybe, and I keep using the word making myself scarce. That's kind of what I've been doing also recently, trying to make myself just not be there, or maybe don't speak, And like I said, my nieces and nephews are around now, that I'm realizing that, I stopped talking. Like, I stopped being me. So it's all part of the work that I'm doing right now, in acknowledging and saying, okay, well, if I'm going to be me, there's a way to be me in this situation, until I am. Things are shifting, and I'll get onto that in a little bit. But just a few other things, and then about sort of that dynamic growing up, and when I was an adult, coming back home for family, and then Ron not doing well, and some things happening in my life, I moved back in with Mom and Ron. As an adult, and that was difficult. I'd already owned my own home, and I'd already, been on my own and traveled and all that sort of thing. And it was interesting at that point, especially because Ron wasn't doing well increasingly. So we're talking the last, I guess, about 7 or 8 years to 10 years or so. Mom was in more of a survival mode. And again, I realized there was all of this anxiety that she wasn't recognizing. And Ron was like Mr. Adventure, and he'd like to take risks and things. And I would like be all hyper and wanting to do things. And it would just push those buttons. And I can see that now. It was an anxiety, and I didn't know it then. And I wish I'd known it, because we could have shifted things. And I feel like we wasted so much time. And I think that's one thing I feel like I want to talk to all mothers and daughters out there and say, don't waste your time. Go see someone. Mom and I have tried, and then we didn't have a lot of resources, but I just wish we tried harder, because Ron and Mom and I especially had this kernel of just a wonderful connection. And it felt like we just got covered over by survival stuff that could have really been just let go of, and we could have just appreciated one another, and maintain a lot of more energy that we lost. Anyway, but over that time, I tried to go back to school, and I started my own business with medicinal earth, working with natural medicinals for Mom and Ron, actually, for Ron's bed sores, and then Mom with her cancer, and anyway, had great results, and I kept going with it. But I never felt like, mom kept saying, oh, you don't need to go back to school. No, I don't think you need to do that. And like, why are you wasting your time with that? And that kind of thing. And in my garden, why are you in your garden? You're still in your garden. I'm so glad I pushed through and kept doing those things, because that's what nourishes me now. But I always had to justify, and, hearing things like, when you organize your entire life, it feels like your entire life, and say, I'm not going to get a job here, and I'm not going to go here because this is important for me to be here. But then hearing, well, you're so selfish when you want to do a workshop one day or something, and there was this weird kind of dynamic at a certain point with mom, and I felt like I became the mother, and she became like the teenage daughter, all angsty, and so anyway, just to say that this is all the fodder that I'm now working on when I'm recognizing and looking back at my mom's life and listening to her story and grieving her and grieving Ron, recognizing and not blaming, but just acknowledging and just saying, okay, that's done. And that's done. But I had to acknowledge it, and I had to be okay with letting it go. And the process of losing my mom and losing Ron in this last 5 years, I also lost my 2 cats, and my 18-year-old cat, I took her last breath in my arms 3 years ago, and then this before I ended up in the hospital early last spring. I held my 13-year-old dog, my buddy, my outdoor buddy, and in my hands and in my arms, and held his head in my hands, and he died. And then next day I was in the hospital with mom and seeing her pass, and it just feels like such an incredibly profound experience that has been lived. And I just am not the same person. And I'm really conscious of time here. So how are we doing?
We're doing great.
Okay. Anyway, I did mention that. Yeah, I wanted to mention that the healing with my mom and coming back, because I had to leave. I had to leave after Ron died. She basically asked me to leave. And when my brother had returned, and I left, and I moved into an RV. I actually remember going, I was holding my Bambi pillow. I've been collecting Walt Disney pillowcases for the years. And I thought it was really appropriate. If I ever wrote a book, it would be like 40-year-old running away with a Bambi pillow, something like that, because I end up at my other brother's house, which is where I am right now. Long story short, with my Bambi pillow in tears, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so fucked up. I don't understand what's happening. Mom is yelling, and I'm selfish, and I'm this, and people are saying that like I'm I don't know. There's just this strange, weird, altered reality that happened, and after Ron passed. And my other brother said, "What can I do? What can I do to help?" And I said, "I'm going to buy an RV, and I'm going to travel, and I'm going to be all self-contained." And he's like, "Okay, let's make it happen." So we did all sorts of ways of figuring it out with finances and whatever. And I bought an RV, and I moved into it, and then I had traveled down to the States with the intention of going out west. Ended up at Lindsay and Betsy's. Thank you, Lindsay and Betsy. They had me there for a long time while I worked on it. But I ended up having repairs that were supposed to be like $900 US that cost like close to $4,000 US. Took all my travel money, and I ended up coming back to Canada, and like Ontario, which is one province over, not very far. Did some supply teaching, worked on my medicinal earth business. That's Brenda Norman phase there. Brenda knows that one very well. She opened that up to me and got me really motivated with my holistic health business. And then Mom and I reconnected again. And then I came back and was supporting her, and we healed, and we talked. She'd already started to lose a little bit of her lucidity at that point, but it would be just like, I walked on eggshells with you, Mom. Like, it felt like I was always like an abusive household in a way, but without that kind of abuse. But like, you're very always cautious and watching what you say. And it came out that she always felt less than. She always felt judged. She never felt good enough. And she was threatened by me in a way. And I was like, are you kidding me? All these years? Because it was something that came out, and I said, why are you responding that way? I totally didn't mean that. And she's like, you said it this way because of, and I was like, okay. And we finally, and this is months before we lost her. So I just to say that, I'm glad we had the opportunity. And if anybody out there is listening and you have any of these kind of issues with anybody in your family, deal with it when you can. Because even at that point, she had lost a little bit of the capacity to work through on a level that maybe I could have used, but I was still able to vocalize. And yeah. And like I said, the ancestral trauma, or as Sam's given me the term, intergenerational trauma, recognizing that, I'm doing like shamanic work now. And I did a ceremony, again, Dorothy Mason counseled me on that, with mom's ashes, and walked the land, because we also sold the property, which is a big part for me, was the saying goodbye to our homestead and the natural world, the trees that I saw and the land and all of that growing up. And I walked the land with the ashes and said goodbye to the land. And then I met my niece down, and we did a ceremony, and we drummed, and we recognized the trauma that the matriarchs and the family share, especially, and said, we're letting it go. We are letting it go. So it was very, very profound.
Mm.
All right, Sam, you're up.
Oh, golly.
Don't know how to transition.
Yeah, really. Kym, that was beautiful. You and I have talked several times about this, but hearing you just uninterrupted talk in that way just strikes me as so moving. And, I have such admiration for your strength and ability to wend your way through what feels overwhelming, and yet here you are, and you're navigating your way through it. And it's not easy. It's really hard, and it's awful, but I just really admire your ability to stay there and to kind of keep this in mind. Thank you for organizing it this way, and we'll hear more. I also have to tell you, Bambi haunted my childhood. I mean, her mother dies, right? And I remember being in the movie theater and crying at the time. And it has taken me decades of therapy to work out Bambi and what Disney does to mothers. It's like, we need movement. So anyway, you also have me thinking about the death of my own parents and how profound that is, Kym, in our lives. I mean, regardless of what actually happened, and I'm not trying to sound like I know your experience, but you were there for your mother, and what a gift. My mom died in 2003, and my father died 9 months after. And I was there when he died. And I think I mentioned to you, I was there when he died. And I remember, I think about it all the time, of what a gift it was that he allowed me to be there when he died. That's kind of how I think about it, actually, that he allowed me to. We were alone and he died. And so I was holding him when he died. And that felt like such a gift to me, to feel like I could be there for my father, and that death lost some of its frightening qualities by virtue of seeing my father die. I thought he was pretty brave in the last years of his life, actually. And I think about him a lot as I age, and hope that, I guess the only way I could say it is, I hope that I do as good a job. And I think the thing to remember, I suppose, is that our children are watching, because I was watching, you know, and I suspect that my children are watching, and how I die tells them something about how scary or not scary or part of life it is, etc. So thank you for kind of directing our attention to that. So my real life intrudes. Oh my God. I'm just going to pick up and let Kym sort that out. There we go. Everything okay, Kym? Okay.
Sister-in-law's office, and someone from the building has just come in.
Oh, well, tell them, come to Northfield. They'll love it. My journey is somewhat different than yours. And what I think I want to do is, actually, I want to cut to the chase, talking about the last 3 months. And I want to talk about loss and trauma. And I'm going to speak about it from my own point of view, and personally. It may not resonate for other people, but I kind of wonder if it does. Because what you said, Kym, about the authentic self not being recognized as the core of trauma, feels to me like something that we've all lived through on a large social scale for the last 3 or 4 years. of feeling like who I am is not recognized in the world, in the larger world, certainly in the world that's fed back to us through the media and our political leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a profound kind of trauma that we're all living through. I feel it for myself. Since the pandemic hit, Julie and I have been here in New Hampshire pretty much stay at home. We go out and shop every other week. I was saying at the Northfield gathering, that was the largest group of people I've seen in 3 months. It was almost overwhelming. Talk about trauma. It was like, who are all these people? Even though I love you all. So what I've been thinking a lot about is the kind of isolation that we're all living through, and it's symbolized by this. It's symbolized by Zoom in a way, which is that we are brought together and we have that, and that is wonderful. Yet we're all staring at screens, and so much of the affect here in our taste of Northfield has been, I want to see you, I want to see you, I want to touch you. Oh, goodbye, goodbye. Oh, I have to hit the button. We're ending the meeting, which is an expression, I think, of the aloneness that many of us feel, and that I've certainly felt. So Julie and I have been sheltering in place. One of the losses that strikes me of these times is the loss of anticipation and the kind of wonderful, we talk about wanting to live in the moment, but one of the things I've been very impressed by is how much I anticipate things. So we canceled our trip to Costa Rica the day before, which was really the day before we were supposed to leave. They closed the borders the day we were going to arrive. So if we had gone to Costa Rica, we would have spent 14 days in a hotel in San Jose, unable to go out. And we've canceled we canceled all of our trips, and all of my work has been canceled. All of the consulting I do to schools over the summer, which I look forward to enormously, seeing teachers and schools, I love them all, visiting and working with them, all that's been canceled. And France in the fall has been canceled.
And we can't go to Washington.
And we can't go to Washington. Julie just reminded me, that's Julie. We can't go to Washington to see little Lucy, where the grandparents in a box for her, over Zoom. So all the anticipation and all the way the hope balloon is lifted by thinking, oh man, in June, I'm going to see everybody at Northfield. I'm going to go visit these schools, see these teachers, I'm going to go to France. The hope balloon doesn't have those things to lift it up. The other thing I think about is the impact of isolation and trauma. Annie Lamont, I think it was Annie Lamont, said, my mind is a wonderful place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. And that's kind of what I think it's like for me, actually, these last 3 months. I've been living in my mind in the sense that I don't have the ordinary routines of going out and seeing the librarian when I get a book, or even a Starbucks barista, somebody who can make a comment that kind of says, oh yeah, right, oh good, oh that's funny, or oh yes, or damn them, or whatever, who live together. I think it's, certainly for Julie and myself, I'll speak just for myself, it's been like a mix between living in a kind of tropical island. On the one hand, can do whatever you want, walk around naked, doesn't matter, so great. And the Zimbardo prison experiment. I don't know if you're familiar with the Zimbardo prison experiment in Stanford, when he put all these undergraduates in a building and they couldn't get out, and it turned into Lord of the Flies. And I think that that's where a lot of our struggle is these days, right now. That kind of background ambient trauma, I think, is very real. I feel it. Some of it is intergenerational for me. It's really hard for me to see some of the right-wing organizing and not think about the Holocaust. And I really do not understand why it feels so alive in my own mind. But we didn't lose anybody in the Holocaust. My family had come over before then, several decades before the war. But there feels like something very real, and maybe it's Bambi and growing up in the 1950s when all of those newsreels were coming out about what happened in Europe, and I was just a preteen. But I get very anxious, actually, at a kind of low level, ambient anxiety kind of level, when I feel the divisiveness and the pull away from my authentic self in terms of what I'm seeing out there. So I think that's all. The only other things I want to say is a couple of things about the pandemic. I love the masks. I don't love wearing a mask. I mean, who can love wearing a mask? But the masks symbolize for me unity and a common good. And when I see somebody wearing a mask, I know in many respects they're doing it as much for me as for them, because masks actually protect me rather than, and my mask protects you. And so it's the most visible thing I can remember in decades in our culture, in which there's been one thing that everybody does, and now, of course, not everybody is doing it, but it's the one thing that everybody does that represents the common good. We don't have a lot of those things. The other thing I spend a lot of time doing is trying to detoxify reality in terms of this trauma I'm talking about. I am very aware for myself of a kind of paranoia inside of me, in which it's very tempting to divide the world into good and bad people. People who wear masks, people who don't, Democrats and Republicans, Trumpites versus good people. And it's a very scary tendency. And I experience it kind of gets me ratcheted up. And so I have been spending a lot of time in terms of pumping up hope in the last month or two, trying to think about other people not as enemies necessarily. So, and I'm going to give you one quick example, and I don't want to take too much as the last example. I've been reaching out to Republicans, and I had this experience of working. I work in a progressive group, political group. We do a lot of agitating here in New Hampshire. I love it. It keeps me sane. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of struggle in our state about absentee balloting. Do people have to go to the polling station during a COVID epidemic, or can they submit a write-in ballot? And you won't believe it, maybe in Canada, but here it's a big, big source of fighting. And a Republican governor commissioned a commission about absentee ballot, and he appointed a prominent Republican to head it. So our group got all up in arms, and we wrote a long letter to this commission with the Republican chairman about all the things that we thought was important and that they needed to take into account. And we were going to send it. We got hundreds of signatures. We're going to send it to the commission. COVID epidemic, where do we send it? I called the chairman's office to talk to his secretary to get his address, full of righteous anger. He answers the phone because nobody's there. It's COVID epidemic. Oh no, it was his cell phone. That's right. The number on the website was his cell phone. Hello, this is Chairman so-and-so. Oh, okay. Why do you want my address, he asked. I said, because we're sending you a letter about the issues that we think are really important. He said, read me your letter. I read him the letter. He says, yeah, you are right. I agree with all of those points, and I want you to help me get the word out. And we had this whole conversation. Now, here's my point. My point is, if he hadn't answered the phone, I would have seen that he was evil incarnate, and we would have gone on and on in this polarized, paranoid kind of place. But in fact, what's evolved is the commission's been really quite good. There's some things I wish they'd done differently. But it's really led me to want to reach out and to talk to people I think are really the enemy and different. And it's for me. It's to reduce that paranoid sense of living in an evil world in which there are monsters and dragons and then there's good people. And to me, that's part of pumping up the hope balloon. Yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit about where I am these days. Kym, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, it's funny because here I'm looking at all my sheets and I'm like, somewhere in here I have, I took a note, and I've been peripherally involved in the mindfulness meetings Bill has been doing Tuesdays, and looking at the notes, I've been getting the terms, and again, working with you, Sam, about the terminology around things, and been working with my reactivity to things, right? And also, like I was saying, we have a negative bias in our family, and I think as humans, we also have a negative bias, and really fighting that and trying to turn that around when I recognize it. And there's the term for that. The Buddhist term is the Pema Chodron paperwork stuff that came in through, or email that came in from Bill. I was looking at that. She mentions that as non-rejection and non-polarization. I was like, that's a thing. Like, you know, like, oh, right. Because that is constant. And especially right now, and that's something that's coming up for me too, like I say, in my family, is also shifting the way that I arrive, shifting the way that I perceive what's happening. And if I am polarizing, well, then how am I going to expect the dynamic to shift? Right?
Right.
And so I'll notice a dynamic and I'm like, I'm feeling hurt and I'm feeling really judged. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. Or I don't like how they're talking about each other. And it's like, well, listen to what I'm just saying to myself. Right. And I'm finding that globally too, is we have this wonderful opportunity. I mean, one thing I want to say is that I felt a deep sense of relief actually, since we keep going back to the shit hit the fan, the WTF that happened. Because for those of us who have been conscious about what's been going on in the world, we're saying this is not sustainable. We can't keep running our schools this way. We can't keep extracting this way. We can't keep, you know, like, I mean, it's emotional. Like the more I would travel, you travel and you go to places and you're like, I can't even step foot in this water. You know, it's like it made me sick inside. And I found what they called it eco-anxiety. And I found since the pandemic globally, it's like there's this conscious sort of raising of awareness, this shifting that's happened. And part of it is unifying. Part of it is for me is finding our commonality. You know, the one part where I'm saying I feel a deep sense of relief because it's like, now everybody's like realizing, okay, this is serious and we have to start to shift these things. And it feels like we're all in this, in some ways, kind of recognizing, you know, the elephant that's in the room. But the part that does scare me is when I see, like, you have conspiracy theory stuff and the whole thing, or, you know, like whatever, I don't want to go into it, but I really feel a sense of fear that, are we going to screw it up even now, when those of us who have common goals can start to splinter? And that's the fear that I have. And it almost feels like I was saying, we have a negative bias, but I also find that we're hardwired to question and to be cynical and to you know, like, I think it really takes an extra effort to unify. Like that happened, that you made the phone call and he answered the phone. So then all of a sudden the shift has happened, completely changed, right?
Yes.
And I'm finding that for myself personally, and as well as through this whole experience, being really aware as a human species how we're like seem to be hardwired to, like, I don't know, to be fighting as opposed to, like, I don't know, like a way of working for things that you believe in as opposed to fighting what you're against. Like there's just a very subtle but very important difference there. And I think, that's been coming up.
I love what you said about reactivity, Kym, and just just being aware of our own reactivity and our quickness to get into a fight mode.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And Devin, I didn't get an answer from you on this, so I hope you're okay. Devin emailed me and checked in. It was a beautiful email, and I want to use a quote that she included in that. So so we oscillate between the mind and the heart, titrating reality with all its beauty and pain. And for me, it's like this is constant juggling. It's like, you know, I'm thinking about this and this is how I want to react to this, and I'm feeling it this way. This is how I'm feeling. There's beauty, there's pain, there's brutality, there's like a fighting for, am I against? There's this, it's constantly feels like we are making these choices of finding that balance, you know. And I found really interesting, there's a recognition. I looked at the word recognition, to recognate, like to recognition, like to re-engage our whole, like not just our brains and our critical thinking and our, you know, but making these logical choices guided by our hearts. And it feels like our essential or higher selves, or whatever you want to call it, feels like we are all globally, personally professionally. There's this whole shift that forcing us to recognize what really is important, recognize the reality that we've created. And yes, we have created it, and it was just inertia carrying us, and now we can change it. And that's what I'm finding. It's like, that's what I'm finding so crazy. I was saying initially when we started this, feeling so raw, because it feels like what I'm going through personally, and I think many people are probably experiencing that, is happening on a global scale. And there's that energy is just, we're just like, like on nerve endings. But it seems like it's, there's an urgency to it. And I feel like I was saying earlier about it being in survival mode, and Tara Brach talks about your limbic sort of reactions. It's where you're coming from, your reptilian brain as opposed to your frontal lobe. And when you're in a survival mode, it's a scary and really tricky time, because it takes that much higher level of consciousness or awareness to bring it down to your heart, and to lead from that, and to make decisions around that. When there's this fear, and there's this, we're losing loved ones, and they're, like what we're seeing on this, people in protesting and all, what's going on. And it's really important and to find the balance. So we're talking heart to heart about how we can make these positive changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I looked up in the word pandemic. People have probably looked this word up too. The Greek god pandemonium, panic, chaos, wildness, and talking about the inner wildness. And that's like starting with the meditation rain, just recognizing, allowing, investigating, nurturing ways that we can. It's not about pushing and reactivity. It's not about pushing something away. It's about recognizing the discomfort, and then moving forward in a positive way, and it feels like I wrote down this like a portal of awakening. It feels like right now, and I feel like that in my life too. And it's a time of caring. And I was saying about Tara Brach being so important to me. She one of her sort of webinars said that may this experience serve the awakening of our hearts. And I created a mantra with Dorothy Mason that said, let her breathe and let us learn through this experience, just time to reset, so time for an awakening of our hearts, and letting Earth heal in the same time.
I mean, on a personal and on a global level, Kym, I mean, it sounds like you're talking about being able to sit with what is happening inside you, being able to kind of not be so reactive that you have to just project it out there or flee from it, but you want to be able to sit and sort out who you are and what has happened to you. And I suppose on a global level, we're trying to, two people who really pump up the hope balloon for me. I just feel like I have to mention it. E.O. Wilson is a biologist. He's in his 90s, and he lives in a nursing home in Lexington, Massachusetts. And he flies around the country still giving lectures about the Half Earth Project and conserving wildlife and species diversity. And he's doing incredible work in his 90s. And the other is Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
Well, she's a buddy of his, and the two of them are on stage together. And she's, of course, close to 90. She's in her 80s, I believe. And she's done just fabulous work on ecodiversity and, beyond chimpanzees. And these people, to me, are just such a model, of the possibilities that are in the world if we can do something, take action. You and I were talking about which comes first, hope or action. And I actually feel sometimes like it's action, that you do something and that gives you hope, rather than sitting on the couch waiting for hope to somehow mobilize you, which for me doesn't really always work. And it's efforts like that and these people who are so inspirational that really pump up my hope balloon through the actions that I'm taking in the world.
It's interesting. You and I had that conversation earlier about that, and I find that's also a balance to be struck. And I was talking about my family dynamic, and we are so physical, we are so active oriented, and I find I'm getting caught. I was actually I got sick. I got sick when I came back from Montreal in March and was really sick, and actually felt so peaceful at that point. And I look back now and I think it was because I couldn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we affirm ourselves through our productivity, and I think that's in my family as well, and it definitely. But I have a lot of anxiety that also, so there's an anxious frenetic energy, and I'm trying to really not go there, but I'm also busiest I could ever be. It's always a busy time for me in the summer. But also where I am with my brother and sister-in-laws, I'm trying to kind of overcompensate, take care of things.
Yeah.
More that, so not just taking up space, but I'm doing, and I get myself so wound up.
Yeah.
So for me, sometimes it's not action first. When is it, and to find that the balance, and like I keep coming back to, we're talking about the mindfulness meetings and the, good intention. That's another Buddhist perspective. And, coming from or positive intention, and leading through that. And then that will then, sort of dictate, or not dictate, but where does the action come from? It comes from that place. Another thing with the shamanic practice for me is also choosing to believe that there are allies and there are guides out there, and I just need to ask for support. And that's why being in the natural world where I am in the country right now has also been a big part of the healing for me. And my brothers yesterday were working outside, and he's like, "Are you talking to the plants?" And I'm like, you know what? It's the first time ever I said, yes.
Right.
I'm talking to all the beings here. That's the first time ever I ever would have said that. I would have made some joke about, yeah, your weird sister. And I didn't go there. And I just said, yeah, actually I am,
Actually, they're talking to you too.
And I believe that, I'm sorry. I do. And I take a lot of, I think it's been part of my healing is to believe that we are in conversation. It's not just about us, and it can't just be about this. Yeah. And there is a higher plan to it all. Yeah. And it's about interconnection. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to mention is that Sangha, and I keep talking about Buddhists, and I made the connection about that, for me now is, with the pandemic, unfortunately, most of us had to kind of make choices and do things that we didn't plan on doing, and like I said, and where I am now is, it has its difficulties, has its challenges, but it feels like the lessons are even deeper, and I'm really being challenged to keep doing the work. But I'm aware of wanting a community, and that's why Northfield is so important. Having this right now, I'm so thankful that we could still do this. How important it is, especially during this time. And I have got, it's funny because I didn't know where I was going. I didn't, like I said, this whole chapter of 20 years of my family being the focus, and Ron and Mom, and not even having any pets that I'm taking care of. I feel like I'm kind of untethered or unmoored, and I think a lot of people are feeling that right now too. But I was sitting with my niece and looking at job postings, looking at working at a farm, or working, going out west again, still thinking that's a possibility, whatever. And a perfect job, teaching job. I mean, I totally closed the door on teaching because I had a burnout and was really sick when Mom and Ron became very sick at the same time, before Ron died. I had to leave teaching, and I thought I couldn't do it. I thought I'm too sensitive to do it, and the system is too broken. And my niece is sitting across from me, and she said, "Hey, Auntie Kym, listen to this." And it was like I could have written it. It's an alternative teaching center in Ottawa, which is not very far from here, but in Ontario, not Quebec. And I sent an email. They sent an email right back, and that's where I'm going in September. And all of the connections that I'm making around it are feeling like positive. Yeah, so I think that's an important part too, and I think that's what makes things so difficult right now. When I was talking about my niece, is we aren't all in positions where we are surrounded by those who nurture us. We are not all necessarily with our Sangha. And we talked about I talked about talking to plants and all of that, and that's another Buddhist term. Again, I'm like, wow, I guess I'm partly Buddhist. Is Bodhicitta? I'm going to say it probably not very well, but basically showing up and assuming that you have a responsibility because we are interconnected, because we are connected to all beings, and that is being a huge guiding principle for me right now. And knowing that if you feel that way, that you're in a position where you're not with people necessarily, all of us are in different contexts right now, kind of just getting through this, and how is that affecting all of us? And I feel it. I really, really, really feel it. And it's actually, like I said when I was joking earlier, the theme could have been what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, but in a way this is also a resilience exercise for all of us, and it really feels like that for me. And I was saying that's why I find the opportunity with all of this too is we have accessibility now to things that are free online, like, so I can be doing these weekly sessions and do meditations, and there's so much available now. It's like the barriers have come down, and we're all just humans trying to get through this together and sharing our gifts and our limitations and our fears and our whatever. Yeah, I talking about the next generation. I mentioned about my niece, and I have to be careful with this because some people know the family. But there was a situation where it became unsafe for her to be unsafe. It became extreme enough that she had to leave that situation. But it's allowed us some time together, and also the family to really start again, like I say, speaking truth and making these changes that needed to happen years ago that are finally happening, and the healing is happening. And I find, like I said, that I'm getting encouraged by the next generation because I see that a lot of the dynamics sort of repeating, and they are speaking to it, saying this is not okay. And so at Christmas time, I spoke to the family. I had a very tearful experience, and I ended up having to cried, and then came back and forced myself to come back and just spoke from the heart. And I just said, we don't have, and I know people listening to this have lost their parents, and some much younger than me or for you having lost our parents. But it's like we are now the parenting generation. We are now the older generation that has to model, that has to be the ones that they go to. And so it's a higher standard now for us, and I think I don't expect the change to happen because of what I've said, but I needed to speak my truth. And that's part of also what I'm recognizing right now. And I'm thinking that, and I keep bringing it back to globally, but it feels like that's what's happening too. There is truth being spoken, and whether or not it's heard. And I think that's a whole other part of it right now, yeah.
Well.
Okay, looking at time. I saw you looking. Okay, that's what I'm just quickly looking to see. Can't omit. Okay, we're good.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, okay, one more thing. Can I do a humor thing? Did I just cut you off? Did you?
No, I just thought what you said was wonderful and a great place to stop, frankly. But humor,
well, I wanted to go back to the humor thing because one of the things that I find really interesting is, like I say, with this Tara Brach thing, is she talks about the thing, her presentations. Animal-headed deities. I've also heard it as animal-headed goddesses. And I know it's probably just surface, and some people will say, well, it's not in depth, but she mentions that in terms of those limbic energies that come up, like reactivity, and like, be it, I'm hurt and I'm crying and I'm poor me, that kind of thing, or like survival, angry, or like I said, frenetic energy. I'm busy, but I'm really anxious. Like it's coming from an anxiety thing, which is, can be positive or negative. And And so I have a little cartoon in my head now to come back to humor, because humor seems to be like the survival skill. Is I don't know if people have seen Ice Age, but anyway, it's an animation feature, and there is a squirrel throughout, all the way through the squirrel, and it's like, you know, got the red eyes and whatever. He's all about getting this nut, and at the end, even that's the last thing you see. He hasn't succeeded in getting this nut, and he's basically frazzled, because, you know, we also, other thing with the next generation is like, oh, we have OCD in our family. Look at that. Like, we, you know, there's all these things like, that explains a lot. It's not just, if you're going to do it right, you know, do it right. But there's actually something to be kind of untangled there, you know, and look at the positive, but also let go of the stuff that doesn't work and acknowledge it. And I'm finding with the limbic energy that the animal-headed deities, I make a little cartoon strip. So I'm like, oh, look at that. I'm Eeyore. Look at that. Oh, wow. We're feeling pretty, you know, or I'm the Ice Age squirrel. It's like, whoa, you can chillax. Yeah. And or Rabbit. I don't know if people know Rabbit and Winnie the Pooh. He's kind of the know-it-all, but he's really, really anxious. That's another good one too. Yeah. And so that's our last heading was rescuing hope. So there's a restoration of hope, and then to rescue it at times when you get, you know, really at the other end of things, you know, and then to bring it back. And you and I talked about the word ludicrous, right? And ludicrum from stage play with all the funny things. So I think we are spiritual beings having a human experience here, and that gives me perspective constantly. You know, I'm just,
well, that's how I'm going to think about you as the Ice Age squirrel, Kym.
I know. Yeah, you have to go look it up now if you don't know what it is, because it's really quite pathetic, actually.
So, Kym, are we leaving time for questions? I'm not clear here.
Yes, we've got 5 minutes, and I invite everybody to turn their video back on. And
I just wanted to. Can we just do it? I just wanted to
flood
do
the screen
reading.
with. Okay.
Can I do a reading?
Let's get everybody on screen first, and then we'll do.
That would be great.
Do your reading.
Sam, your number 5 got cut off. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with what we've done, Kym, and I'm happy to thank you for doing this together. And I'd love to hear people's questions and what's on their minds.
I'd like to know about rage. Like, how do people deal with their anger?
Do you want to do questions and then a closing reading?
Well, let's do questions to see where we're at. Bill, have you got questions there?
Let's see. Would you all like to be recognized for a question for them?
Can you type in my one, or just tell them?
Julie is whispering in my ear. She'd like to know about rage and how people are dealing with their anger in these times. But that's a general conversation, Julie.
It just feels like there's so many ways you and Kym are up and over, and I'm righteous rage, and I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's funny we didn't talk about that word.
Rage? Yeah.
Devin has a question.
Great.
Devin, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm there doing a thing. Well, I just wanted to first thank both of you for your talk and your courage, and also Kym. It was very, I don't know, it touched me deeply. So that's one thing. And from, maybe it's more the sense of it all, but I was wondering if you felt that grief really opens in some weird way to hope. Like, in the strangest way, the more grief, the more vulnerability, and the hope. So that's the question. And the other thing, I wanted to give you the feedback that you seem so grounded in yourself and your body, and more vulnerable, but more whole. So I really recognize that as well.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you so much for that. Because I was just self-criticizing. I was like, oh my God, I used my hands too much. I was too hyper. Yeah, and I think you got it. I think that's the part that I feel relief about, is that we are globally grieving. And I think I call it the great equalizer. Like, it feels like we are all so connected now because we're talking truth. You know, we're all facing that stark reality that up until now with that inertia, and there was that kind of like blinders, you know, no, we can do this, you know, but they're, yeah, it just, you got it, that nail on the head for sure.
Well, my 2 cents actually, I see it a little differently.
Mm.
I think Devin's completely right. The grief is a precursor to hope. My feeling is we're not grieving, actually, Kym. We're more melancholic. And what we really need, I say this to all my friends, we need weeping corners in every town, in every city, where people can gather and cry. And that's not what we're doing. We're fighting and all this divisiveness. And I really wish for much more direct grief, because I think, Devin, I think grief is really at the core, and that's what will lead to real change. And we don't give ourselves an opportunity to really weep and grieve. Maybe we will. Yeah. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Other questions?
Veronica here. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm really, what you just said, Sam, this gives me a lot of food for thought. When Argentina went bankrupt in 2001, what actually saved the country were the popular assemblies. People all over Argentina, in all the barrios, the neighborhoods, people got together to grieve, to talk, to exchange, to support each other. And that saved the country.
Wow.
At that moment. And anybody who's interested, you can go. It's just the popular assemblies, you know, they would exchange therapy for city pies. They divorced, they remarried in the popular assemblies, they fixed the country, you know. And then the interesting thing was, somehow nature supported that, because they had an incredible crop for those 2 years. The popular assemblies went on for 2 years. I just want to say that because for me, it is one of the things that really gives me hope for humanity, that happened there. Banks were closed. You couldn't access your money. Yeah, so important.
That was really interesting.
Really
Thank you.
interesting.
It's funny, I was in Argentina when that happened. Really, I went to go to a bank machine and it's like, wow, okay, I don't really actually have my money. It's really not mine. Yeah, and then talking to people about what their experience, it was an incredible time.
Incredible. Mm-hmm.
One of the early features of the COVID pandemic for me was that it undercut the importance of money. I mean, it's right. I mean, it's become a little clearer that actually being wealthier, people who are wealthier do better because they can self-isolate. But in the early days, it was like money really didn't matter. We were all going to die if we're not careful. And you could die if you're rich, you could die if you're poor. And there was something very important in feeling like we were going through something like that.
Yeah, you were rich if you had toilet paper.
Right.
Different kind of paper currency. Well, Kym, this might be a good time for you to lead us in your closing thoughts, and then we'll get broken up into the groups for those who'd like to stay on for that.
Sam, are you good if I just do the end read?
Absolutely, do it. Yes.
The movement of awakening is to a wider field of consciousness, a shared heart space. I invite us to connect with that now. To imagine how so many of us right now are practicing together, sincerely bringing our attention to the challenging places, awakening through these universal energies to that heart space. Feel us all around the globe. A shared heart space that can hold and respond to our hurting world. And together now to feel our prayer that this heart space can hold those who are most vulnerable with care. To let ourselves be touched. Feel tenderness towards, care towards these beings. To know them as part of us, part of our hearts. To sense we hold each other and all beings in our hearts. that we might live from loving presence, serve from loving presence, even savor from loving presence. What would love have you do today? Thank you all for this time.
Thank you, Kym.
Love you.